Well, joining me now in studio is Isaac Eshetu. He's an analyst and journalist who specializes in Ethiopia. In Brussels, we have Africa Affairs analyst Collins Nweke. He also happens to be involved in local government in Belgium. And Awol Allo is in London. He's a lecturer at Keele University and a specialist in human rights, international law, and Ethiopia. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Isaac, the attempted coup, did it come as a shock to you?
Yes, it did. It has come to many Ethiopians and also international commentators as a whole. I'd like to take this opportunity to send my condolences to the family of those who were killed. It was a great shock to all of us because people are afraid that this might be a slide back of democracy in terms of...
Yeah, a slide back. And it's interesting as we try to understand what exactly were the motivations behind it and how big it was. Awol Allo, we're hearing from state media in Ethiopia that the man that they accuse of being the mastermind behind this, Asaminu Tsige, the brigadier general, has been killed. He was Amhara security chief. What does that mean to you? What does that suggest right now? Because things are not absolutely clear.
I think this in some significant ways, I think might signal tightening up of security in the country and tightening up of security in a country that is just embarking on a democratic experiment might mean, I think, a lot of complications in terms of popular perception, in terms of the legitimacy of the government, but also I think in terms of escalating and already bubbling up tension between the government and certain sections of the society. So while I think the event in itself have some serious ramification for the transition that is underway in the country, but the events over the weekend are primarily, I think, a confrontation between regional forces at the Amhara regional state level in terms of the direction the region and also the country was taking.
Collins, because it happened in Amhara, can we say that this is primarily a regional issue and not necessarily something that might rattle the entire state?
It will definitely rattle the entire state, even though there are strong indications that it has a regional tint to it. Now, the fact that it happened in Amhara is indicative of how a regional conflict could actually cause very serious disruption, on national front. Now, let's not forget also that in the region where the Prime Minister comes from, the Oromo ethnic group, they haven't seen quite some calm in the last period. So I believe that ultimately the nature and essentially the how far-reaching the federal structure that is being considered is will determine how much these regional conflicts could be contained and self-determination actually, ruling over all the conflicts.
Isaac, something that we had spoken about in the past was we saw the protests among the Oromo people. It ballooned, there was bloodshed. It captured the imagination of the international community. We've seen some protests among ethnic Amhara people. And so this brigadier general was accused of recruiting ethnic Amhara militias, right, and trying to exploit, I guess, the grievances of a lot of the Amhara people. Just how serious is that issue in the region, and just how big might it be that you might have thousands of Amhara people who are willing to join those militias?
Well, I don't think I could say anything like with a definite surety, but at the same time, I think one of the problems in Ethiopian politics seems to be ultra-nationalism, especially the violent one. So I think in the regions, including the Amhara region, I think there are ultra-nationalist elements that have been gaining momentum in the last 3-4 years, and they enjoy some kind of popular support, and at the same time, things might get very complicated from now on, because there are supporters and there are people who support ultra-nationalist movements in the country. So that seems to be one of the biggest challenges in Ethiopia right now.
Awol Allo, how close was Abiy Ahmed to losing his job? If we say it's a failed coup attempt, had they succeeded, what would we have seen?
I think we're very, very far, actually, from that kind of regional level intrigue and conspiracy to reach the federal level, pass multiple levels of security and threaten the seat of the prime minister. I don't think we are there. It's actually not really clear to me what they had in mind when they started something that looks like a coup at the regional level, where in fact they know for sure that the federal government, one way or another, would come in and foil, whether it is a coup or something else that they are attempting. So technically speaking, while it is, I think, possible to have a coup in the sense of extra-constitutional change of government at the regional level, it is very unlikely for a coup of that kind to be successful, because you have another layer of government that is much more powerful, have a national defense and much broader security that would come in and put you under control. So it's not really clear what they had in mind, but as one of the guests was saying, there was this rise of or resurgence of nationalism of a very aggressive kind in the Amhara region that is feeding off, on the back of the grievances of the last 27 or so years.
Right. Collins, whether on the regional level or whether at the federal level, is this a reminder that there are some people who don't like Abiy Ahmed's reforms?
Obviously. I mean, Abiy Ahmed has managed to make quite some enemies with the aggressive reforms that he had put in place. Let's pause for a while and consider, some of the accomplishments that the young man has made since taking over power. He has liberalized the press. Women empowerment, became an issue. There are strong indications that he's fighting corruption, institutional corruption, I must add, heads on, and quite a number of other things. However, of course, the fact that he has not been very clear about, the national election that is supposed to take place in 2020 continues to be a source of worry for a number of people, and perhaps helping to fuel the insecurity of opposition forces. And of course, the coalition government, the coalition that has come together to form the government, it is unclear whether it will carry on as a coalition of like minds, or it will transform to a political party. So internally, that too is an issue. So these are some of the little bits and pieces that up and say, yes, this is where all of these issues are coming from.
Isaac, are there too many people like Assam Nutsige who stand to lose much if Abiy Ahmed's aggressive reforms, as Colin said, those reforms go through?
Well, I would like to add a few points before that. I think Abiy's government has done a lot of good in terms of reforms, political reforms that the country really needed like 14 months ago. So before Abiy, before the new government, before the new reform, Ethiopia was a very dictatorial state, and we have come far from that. Hundreds of political prisoners have been released, journalists have been released. Women empowerment is a thing, just like Collins mentioned, and we have come far in that regard. But it's far from being very easy. At the same time, it's not very easy to have a smooth transformation from a very dictatorial state to a free one. So I think Abiy has a lot of challenges to deal with, but at the same time, I don't think he would lose complete support of the people. I don't think his job is in any danger, as you've chosen to put it. But I think, of course, there are going to be lots of challenges in becoming a more democratic. We have a long way to go.
Do we have any reason to disbelieve the state, or disbelieve their methods, or maybe question how they did it when they say that they killed the guy?
Well, it's a developing story. I think that should be clear. And at the same time, the kind of information that's coming is very limited at the moment. There seems to be a blackout on internet access in many regions in Ethiopia. So the kind of information is very limited at the moment, and it's only the government giving all this press release. And we have to have other sources maybe in the coming days, and we cannot conclude everything in general. Right. So we have much more work to do in terms of talking about these stories.
Right. Awol Allo, when you have the army chief, who's undoubtedly close to all the leadership, killed in his house by his own bodyguard, it becomes something that's very personal. And usually these things lead to witch hunts because you can't trust those people around you. Might that switch this government of Abiy Ahmed into fighting mode? And might that be a complete distraction from the reform agenda? Might we see a new phase now in Abiy's leadership?
I think there will certainly be a pivot in terms of law and order, in terms of guaranteeing security. I think there are two things that we have been witnessing over the course of the last 1 year and almost half now since Abiy came to power. On the one hand, what we saw is a continuously weakening state, a state that used to be extremely authoritarian, very powerful, used violence to deal with the population, suddenly abandoned that powerful instrument and trying to be very, very democratic, accommodative, patient, and allowing democratic exercise. While this is happening, there was a significant escalation, a significant rise in terms of demand for political participation on the part of the populace. And the state did not really have the infrastructure to actually accommodate, to receive all those demands, all those calls, and channel them to a constructive path. So you have that mismatch. In some areas, the demand for political participation was expressing itself not in democratic terms, but in violent terms. And that's why we have, for example, at the moment, one of the highest number of internally displaced people in the country. So the government has been extremely patient in terms of allowing democratic exercise. The question now is, on the top of the huge amount of problems of insecurity that we had leading to the days of people, now this has gone so far, reaching up to the inner circles of the government. So would the government continue the same path, or would it pivot? I think from what we heard yesterday from some of the regional governments who came out and condemned the attempted coup, that there will be some pivots. And this pivot would mean, particularly in a country like Ethiopia, where most instruments that are used by the government tends to be blunt, that is usually force, or denying people access to certain things, including maybe access to internet, some restriction on media, something along that line would be expected. But I also think that the commitment for reform to get the country over the line is very strong on the part of this administration, and I do hope that they will try their maximum not to shut down spaces for disagreement, for debate, and a dialogue over the nature of this transition that the country has embarked on.
Collins, if the state has been used to using these blunt instruments over the years, this is what they've known best over the years, and you've had a failed coup attempt, as I said, that was very personal. Are we going to see that pivot where the state does what it used to do best first, and reforms may come second until the security threat is sorted out?
I hope that wouldn't be the case. I have reasons to believe that it's going to get worse before it gets better. The reason I say this is because we have seen from the antecedents of Abiy Ahmed that he is heads-on for reform and genuine democratic transition. Now, I think he is very likely to resist the urge and the tendency of, his backbenchers, so to speak, to go hardline and use the instruments that they are used to, which is blunt force. And that in itself would create some, turmoil, disunity between his government, within his government. And I think how he handles that will determine the extent to which the peace within his group is going to be preserved. But I think he appears to be a man that somehow favors, compromise. But the extent to which he's going to go high-handedly against, the opposition and people seem to be against reform, is doubtful.
Isaac, if he crushes this militant Amhara nationalism, what will that do? That's for Isaac. Go ahead, Isaac.
Okay. Well, I think, as a journalist, I think the media has to continue being the fourth state in keeping the check and balance that's supposed to go around. So I don't think crushing would really be a viable solution. But I think they have a lot to improve, because to add on the points that were mentioned by Dr. Awol Allo, it's a new instrument that's coming to play here. And people have, the politics have an open space now, because in the past it used to be very closed, and now we're having an open space for politics, and that creates more competition. And ultranationalism, even in its violent form, is going to be a huge challenge in the upcoming time. So I think it's going to be a huge challenge. I don't know if crushing is going to be a solution for that, but at the same time, there needs to be the protection to freedom of expression. At the same time, I don't know if Abiy's government is going to be able to strike the balance between all these things, because, as I've said before, a transformation from a completely dictatorial country to a more inclusive one is going to be hard. But I think they're doing a good job in terms of being inclusive to minorities, coming close in that regard. They're doing a very good job. But at the same time, the challenges that are lined up for the Abiy's administration are huge, and I think it's going to need the international community in actively supporting the democratization process in Ethiopia.
Yeah, it's an
we
interesting
need
test.
the world to support us.
Certainly, interesting test of his leadership. Awol Allo, we look at Ethiopia. Ethiopia has always been a beautiful country with a tremendous history, but over the past year or so, it's seemed more beautiful because there was an air of optimism about it. And even so, in terms of soft power, suddenly you have the Ethiopians, because they held out the olive branch to the Eritreans, the Ethiopians are suddenly being asked to be peacemakers and mediators in Sudan and elsewhere. With this incident over the past weekend, has it dented Ethiopia's soft power that was blooming over the past year?
I think this all really would depend on how the government would deal with this problem. I don't think this would be significant enough in terms of, I think, damaging the image and reputation that the Ethiopian state has, precisely because part of this reputation comes from the significant geostrategic role the country plays in the region because of its population size and also its growing economy. So I don't think this would have a damaging effect. But I think what is really important is that in order for this country to use all the potentials that it has, it is very important that this transition works. It is very important that the various actors in the country set aside their differences and come together around a common vision. One of the key challenges for the Prime Minister is really the question of how to bring together so many different actors who can see their own interests, specifically at the regional level, but don't seem to see what interests they have together as a country. And the challenge is precisely about bringing these different actors together at a time when there is a significant rise of nationalist sentiments, deployment of nationalist rhetorics against one another. One of the striking things over the course of the last 1 year is that Abiy is ethnic Oromo. He comes from the party that represents the Oromo people within the ruling EPRDF coalition. And most nationalist Oromos see Abiy as not nationalist enough. Amhara see him as somebody that is simply working for the interest of the Oromo to marginalize other ethnic groups. Various actors also have their own perspectives. And the problem we have this is because everybody in the country looks at things from their own perspective. Everybody is a victim. The entire country is turned into some kind of grievance chart where everybody preaches about victimhood. And I think it's important for the country to move forward, to come together around a common vision. And for once, for the various actors to see the collective interests of the Ethiopian people, not just their own specific interest. Unless we do that, it would be very difficult for the country to move forward. There are just way too many diverse interests and powerful forces to take down not just the country, but also the entire region.
Well, it's a healthy reminder that it's such a victory in itself, keeping such a diverse, vast nation together in the first place, which is fascinating and makes Ethiopia so special. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. Isaac Eshetu, Collins Nweke, and Awol Allo. Thanks again.